If you're telling the Wikipedia version of the story, then you're not doing a good job as a filmmaker. It's like, what's beneath the surface? And as long as there's stories to tell and as long as there's opportunities to get beneath that surface, I'm going to keep doing what I do.
Welcome to Beyond the Lens, presented by Diesel Films. I am Seth Shapiro.
And I'm AJ Speaks.
In this episode, we welcome award-winning director Anthony Smith, who has been a driving force at NFL media for the last 16 years. Among his important work in the social justice space for the NFL, Anthony has directed documentaries about Fritz Pollard, Nipsey Hussle, and for this conversation, we will go beyond the lens on his film about the dynamic Hall of Fame running back, Jim Brown, as part of the NFL Films documentary series, A Football Life. Anthony was just nominated for 7 Sports Emmys Awards, an impressive feat.
Anthony tells us how his military upbringing helped shape his love of movies, what it was like being in the presence of the great Jim Brown, and he shares some insightful advice for aspiring filmmakers. Here is Beyond the Lens from Diesel Films.
Today we have a very special guest, not only a friend of mine, but he is an Emmy award-winning director, Anthony Smith. Anthony, what's good, my man?
How's it going, Seth, AJ? How you guys feeling this morning?
Looking forward to talking to you.
So, Anthony, we break this podcast up into 3 acts, with the first act being about you and your upbringing. Talk a little bit about your upbringing. I know you moved around a lot.
Yeah, so I was actually born in Germany. My father was in the military for 27 years. So I was born in Germany, came back to the States, went back to Germany before I was able to settle down. And my parents were able to settle down a little bit. When I was in high school, I lived in Maryland and Alabama and Texas and California. And as I mentioned, Germany. And I think seeing so much of the country and seeing so much of the world at a young age definitely had an impact on me and just my perspective in terms of the country, but in terms of the people in the country and the way that we were all the same and differences that we had that should be highlighted and should be celebrated. So I think moving around a lot definitely had an impact on me and in some ways led to my love of sports and also my love of entertainment. I learned very early on the quickest way to make friends at the new school. I mean, we've all seen the shows, the sitcoms where the new kid at school gets picked on and they got to fit in. But me and my brother quickly realized very early on that if you were good in sports, that you make friends very quickly. But also if you kind of knew what was going on from a pop culture standpoint, music, movies, television, that was also an icebreaker and a way to make friends. So in some ways that was a defense mechanism early on that ended up, blossoming into a full love affair, if you will, with those two topics.
When did you know that you wanted to get into film, and who was your occupational inspiration?
Wow. So I remember very early on, and this happened in Germany when we went back. So we went back to Germany when I was 7 years old, and we stayed for 3 years. And 7 to 10, those are key years, in the development of a young person. And so we get over there, we found out early on that they had one American television station and it played like TV shows from like the 60s and 70s, man. It was like old stuff. So we used to rent a lot of movies. So during those 3 years, I was just watching everything that I can get my hands on. A lot of Steven Spielberg movies, comic book movies were starting to happen. I think the first Batman came out at that time. And then right before we left, there's a movie that came out called Do the Right Thing. And I saw Do the Right Thing, and I was like, I'd never seen anything like that. And in some ways, it was shocking because the content isn't really content that you would think would be appropriate for a 9 or 10-year-old. But my parents both were like, this is important that you see. This is an important film. And I watched that and was just blown away because I'd never seen anything like that. And I was like, man, I gotta find out more about how this came to be and who Mookie is. Come to find out that Mookie was actually the director of the film, Spike Lee. And when we're kids, they had those little books, on your favorite athletes and entertainers like Tom Cruise and Eddie Murphy and all these people. And they're like, 40, 50 pages. You get them in the library, you just read about all these different people's biographies. I got a biography on Spike Lee. And I was like, man, this is amazing. And then as I get into middle school and high school, as I watch more movies, I start to learn more about television production and film production. But then at the same time, watching a lot of sports and just wanting to know, how do they do this? Like, how does this game end up on TV? And just being very inquisitive at a young age in terms of how things were made and how the things that ended up on our TVs got made. I knew that I wanted to do something in that arena very early on. I knew I wanted to do something centered around sports, but also television or film that kind of dealt with my love of sports.
I figured they would get back to Spike at some point.
It always goes back to Spike.
Have you met Spike, Anthony?
I have not. I've met a lot of people, have not met Spike Lee.
Oh, that's got to happen. That's got to happen.
I want to meet you.
Yeah, that's got to happen. I'm surprised you haven't met him through something. But I did want to ask you, I know you spent some of your formative years in Alabama, going to high school in the South. What was that like, being a Black teenager down in Alabama during those years?
Well, it was very interesting. And, in some ways, I'm glad that, actually, in many ways, I'm glad that's where I spent. And I was there from, I think, 7th grade through 12th grade. And in some ways, I'm very happy that that's where I went to high school, because that's like the heart of the civil rights movement. It's like, and that's still, in the 90s, you can still feel that. Those people are still, they're still in their 50s, It's not like they're senior citizens. They're still late 40s, early 50s. So that history is there, and it's everywhere, and it's all around you. So you're able to learn so much just by being around these giants. I mean, the pastor of my church actually marched with Dr. King. So all of that history is just at your fingertips. That was great to experience. It's interesting because, moving out to LA, one of the first things people ask is like, man, you grew up in Alabama. What was that like? And to be honest, I had a tougher time acclimating to LA, because when I moved to LA, I found LA actually to be more segregated than Alabama was. And it was very interesting, because LA, look, I mean, for anybody that's lived in LA or been in LA for any period of time, LA is very broken up into ethnic enclaves, where you have South Central, you have East LA, you have Koreatown, you have Beverly Hills. Everybody lives in their little neighborhoods. And the way that LA is set up, unlike a city like New York or Chicago, where there's public transportation, you could be in your car, go to work, go home, and not really interact with anybody else unless you're in the sports arena. That's still one of the places where people from all cultures can come and congregate together in a city like LA. But LA, moving to LA was a rude awakening, and there was definitely some acclimation that had to happen on my end, because I was used to being around, many different people. That's also, coming from a military, background, where, on a military base, military is made up of everybody. So even though I was growing up in Alabama, I was still sheltered in some ways from some of the things that people may think of when they think of the Deep South. And, and there were instances where you kind of, where to go and where to avoid. And there's certain cities and little towns that if you're going down for the high school football game, you might want to take the scenic route versus taking the direct route. But no, I mean, all in all, it was a great experience.
What was your experience like at USC Film School?
I loved USC. I mean, they talk about, USC Film School being the best film school in the world, and the training that you get, the learning that you're able to achieve while you're there, it's second to none. But I think more than anything, it's the relationships that you make. Many of those people that I went to school with, they're still in the industry today. And they're still friends to this day. Still calls that you can make if you're working through something, or if you have an idea, but you need to workshop it a little bit. It's the relationships were key, but also being able to listen to John Singleton come in and give a lecture, or Steven Spielberg to come in and give a lecture. Dr. Todd Boyd from USC, shout out, who I still talk to this day, listening to his lectures. There were so many great filmmakers that would come through and just give lectures and talk about the craft, that those words are still words that stick with me to this day, with things that I do and in projects that I work on.
Yeah, and I know Dr. Boyd, I interviewed him for a Dave Parker documentary for MLB, and he had great things to say about you.
Okay.
Yeah. He was like, Anthony, my student, and now he's your friend. He's your boy.
Yeah, that's my guy.
People like that are great mentors, right? Have y'all created that mentor relationship?
Well, I mean, look, the thing is, and it's funny. My wife and I were just talking about this last night about mentors and mentorship, and like what true mentorship is. And I don't know how you guys feel. You guys may feel the same. You may feel differently. But I found like with true mentors in my life, they're people that 9 times out of 10, when you're talking to them, you're just talking about life. You're just talking about, your kids and just challenges that you're having with COVID, and just, how are you doing? And they're just checking in, and you're checking in on them. And obviously work plays a part in it, but it's a relationship, it's a friendship. It's it's like any other relationship in your life. And it goes both ways. If they're doing all the giving and you're doing all the taking, it doesn't work. And vice versa. If you're doing all the giving and you're the one that's proactive and reaching out and they're not really, reciprocating, then it doesn't work either. And I've had those situations in my life as well, where there's people that you think are your mentors and you want them to be your mentors, but they're not really your mentors. And there are people that, you wake up, 5 years later and you're like, man, I learned so much with this person, and I'm going to continue to talk to this person and learn from this person, and just kind of take what I can from their experience and their guidance, as we're on this path, in our careers, but also in life.
So Anthony, we're going to enter into the second act, and obviously there are so many films of yours that we could talk about. Fritz Pollard, the Black Quarterback documentary series. I mean, there's just so many. But for the purpose of this podcast, we're going to focus on Jim Brown, which was part of the Emmy Award-winning series, A Football Life. How did it come about that you were able to direct Jim Brown, A Football Life?
So it's a very interesting journey with that particular film. So the backstory is that at that point, and like now, 2021, I've known Monique Brown, who's Jim's wife, and Jim for over a decade now. But at the point of the film, I'd known him for a few years, and Jim had appeared in a couple of projects that I'd worked on, and again, just somebody, Jim and his wife. We talk about mentors and direct mentors and indirect mentors. And it just seemed like every time I would talk to Jim and his wife, there'd just be something that I would take away, and I'd just be like, man, they are on it, and they're just a wealth of knowledge in terms of navigating the world. So I'd known them for a couple of years, and by this point, A Football Life was a series that NFL Films had produced, I think, for like 3 or 4 years at that point. And they had interviewed the legends of the game, but Jim Brown was a name that they had tried, and at that point just hadn't had success on. And Jim is very particular in terms of the projects that he selects and that he takes. And for whatever reason, Jim hadn't agreed to do A Football Life yet. Around the time of his 80th birthday, I started having conversations with Monique about finding a way to celebrate Jim's 80th birthday on the NFL Network. So we were kicking around some ideas, and one of the ideas that came up, and she had this great idea. She said, what if we did some sort of roundtable where it's Jim with players that he respects and players that idolize him. So we ended up doing a roundtable. It was Jim, it was Marcus Allen, it was Marshall Faulk, it was Eric Dickerson, it was Franco Harris, Curtis Martin. And coming off of that, and it was amazing. And those are
that's some big names.
those are alphas in every sense of the word. But to see the way that they deferred and their respect for Jim was amazing, because they weren't alphas on that day. Like, there was one alpha, and it was Jim Brown. So coming out of that, Monique brought up the fact that films had reached out about doing Jim Brown Football Life. And so we were talking, and anyway, to make a long story short, I had previously done a film with NFL Films the year before. It's called A Tale of Two Cities, on the rivalry between the Cowboys and 49ers in the cities of Dallas and San Francisco over the course of 25 years. So looking at the two teams, but also looking at what was happening in the cities. So I had just done a film with them. Anyway, just started having conversations, and one thing led to another. So they felt comfortable with me coming on and directing this particular film, and working with films. I actually worked with them, years since then as well on multiple projects. But working with them was great. And the way that they have it set up, man, it's amazing, because you have a partner. So no matter what film you have, like, there's two people that attack the film. So my partner on this, I got to give a shout out, Angela Torma, who's co-producer, editor. She was like the right-hand person on that. And we were able to tell a pretty amazing story. And Jim was great. And, you think somebody 80 years old, you think that they would be moving at a slower pace, wouldn't be as willing to travel, wouldn't be as willing to do long interviews. But Jim had not slowed down then. And 5 years later, Jim is still not slowed down, and he's still all over the place, traveling everywhere. But it was amazing. I mean, and being able to spend a year with Jim and do, long interviews with him, but also talk to so many different people who respected him and who were icons in their own right, from Jesse Jackson to Harry Edwards to, obviously great running backs like Larry Zonka and Emmitt Smith and, you name it, Eric Dickerson, Marcus Allen, all these greats, and the level of respect that they had for him, it was really eye-opening and inspirational to see.
Couple questions on the interviews. How many of them did he grant you? How long did they go? Were there any challenges there? And then why did you pick the warehouse setting for the one interview?
So there were two interviews. They're roughly 2 hours each. So there was one interview that we focused specifically on the football, and then in the other interview, decided to focus specifically on life after football. Because in many ways, look, this is an hour-long doc. It could have been 3 hours because Jim's life. You have football, you have Hollywood, which is an often forgotten part of his story, where, in reality, Jim was the first Black action star and was that for about a decade. So you have that. And then obviously we know the work that he's done in the social justice sphere, the work's bringing the Bloods and Crips together, in some ways being a big brother to Muhammad Ali, which I didn't even realize when the project started. We saw a little bit of that in Regina King's great film that just came out, One Night in Miami, where, we think Muhammad Ali and we think this fully developed icon, but seeing that there was somebody that he actually looked up to and deferred to and kind of guided him was eye-opening. And, a great story from this particular doc. I wanted to interview Muhammad and his wife, Lonnie, for this project. And by that point, Muhammad wasn't doing any more interviews. And during production, and his wife, Lonnie, she agreed. During production, unfortunately, tragically, he passed away. So I just assumed that his wife was going to end up passing on the opportunity as well. And I hadn't followed up and I hadn't reached out to pay my respects and make sure that, that I wasn't doing anything that was out of pocket. And I ended up getting an email from her asking when we're going to do the interview. And I was shocked. I was like, she still wants to do the interview. And that gesture alone, and then talking with her about Jim's relationship with Muhammad, it clicked and I understood why. She had so much respect for Jim and their relationship that she still wanted to do the interview. And that tells you everything you need to know about Jim Brown.
Amazing. Now, I know Jim, you touched on in the film, he kind of had a temper. He's a little bit surly of a guy. How tough was it, interviewing Jim? And, did you feel any of that intimidation? He's a very intimidating figure.
Not really. Again, I had known him. I had been around him enough over the previous years to not be intimidated. But I think intimidated might be the wrong word. There's obviously a respect, and there's a high respect factor, not only with Jim, but with a lot of these iconic figures that we do interviews with. I mean, Seth, I know that you do a lot with Bob Costas and and other legends and icons that that we grew up watching and wanting to emulate. And there's a respect factor, and there is an awe. But I don't know if I was intimidated or if I ever do get intimidated, just because I think that I'm just so comfortable in doing what I do. That I would think, just kind of knowing you as long as I've known you and talking to you, you're the same way. Like we know how to interview somebody, and we're comfortable, and we come in prepared for these particular interviews. So I think the key is just being prepared. And if you're prepared, and there's a respect factor, and there's a respect factor on both ends, which there was, I felt comfortable. I felt like I was in good hands. And I will say this though, is that Jim Brown, even at this stage in his life, just looking at him and seeing how big he is and how strong he looks, it's like I couldn't imagine trying to tackle that guy when he was 20 or 30. But even at 80, I'm like, this is a big guy. And,
I think I saw him in Miami. 10 years ago, and he was like jacked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I saw him at like a market, and he was just like, people were just like, we're not talking to this guy.
Yeah.
He looks tough.
Yeah. There's just physical
aura about him.
Yeah, but that's the other thing too, and you hit on it, Seth. It's not just being physically big. It's just an aura. It's just it's just this thing where when he travels, and you're in the presence, you're like, okay, man, I get it. And there's very few people that I've been around that are like that, or that are just presences where you're like, man, this is just on a different level. I remember I was at a Super Bowl one year. I think it was in Houston, and like there's very few moments just doing this as long as I've done it where I just have to stop and be like, man, this is crazy. But I was at a Super Bowl party, and it's this huge room, and Shaquille O'Neal comes into the room, and everybody's like, oh my God, it's Shaq, and everybody's looking at people like, with the pictures, and then on the other side of the room, Yao Ming comes into the room, and it's Yao Ming, and so Yao Ming sees Shaq from across the room. And they just start coming together. I swear to God, it was like Godzilla and King Kong. And people are just like, and like everybody's like this small. You're seeing them come through the room. You're like, this is crazy. Like this is not normal stuff right here. But Jim Brown kind of has that presence where I've been around him enough times where I just kind of see people look at him when he comes in, and even though we may not get intimidated, you can see other people get intimidated. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had a great line in that where Jim Brown was always in motion. Only a lens and a camera could stop him. What came first? Was it the line, or was it the idea to do the floating photos and that whole thing? Walk us through that process.
So the floating photos, I think it was very early on. One of the first interviews might have been Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. And we're talking about another icon, another legend. When he comes in the room, people were just like, oh my God, it's Kareem. And we were talking, and we just kind of started talking about, some of the pictures that they had taken over the course of, of their life, or and just kind of at different phases in their life and different places they had been. And not necessarily pictures together, but just, the idea of pictures came up. And when I stopped and started to think about it, I was like, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And if you just look at different pictures in Jim's life, there's just so many different, almost like different lives within this one life. So the idea is that with the floating images is that as the images are floating through the air, you just pick one, image. If you just grab one of the images out of the air, that could be one life. And if you grab another picture, that could be another life. This is the life of a social activist, or this is the life of a great football player. This is the life of a Hollywood star. So this is the life of like a Michael Eric Dyson or an Al Sharpton. And this is the life of an Emmitt Smith or a Barry Sanders, or this is the life of a Tom Cruise or Eddie Murphy, but it actually happens to be the same person. So the idea is like all these different lives that, that you can just kind of snatch out of the air. You could have gone in so many different directions, but the fact that this was just one person, and as it lands, you see it's one person. That was the idea.
How challenging was it to try to capture all of his football greatness in that one little, in that way when you only had so much time?
Extremely challenging. The first cut of this thing was, I think it was like over 2 hours long, and we had to cut down less than an hour. I mean, it had to be, with commercial breaks, I think we were around 42, 43 minutes. So there's a lot that got left on the cutting room floor. But I mean, it was tough. I mean, just the Hollywood section. I mean, there was so much that got cut out there. Now it was tough, but having an outline, and I know some people outline, some people don't outline. I'm a big proponent of outlining and pretty much laying out how beat by beat this film, this project, this feature could go. And then obviously, you leave room for curveballs and to go in a completely different direction if you have to, and if the interviews take you somewhere else. Having an outline, I was able to stick to the outline for the most part, and that helped kind of funnel the questions and keep a tunnel vision on the questions and keep me, online and on track as I was doing the interviews.
I had a question about that. Is there ever any discussion of doing a longer version for, maybe a streaming platform or, anything like that? Because I know there's a challenge working in a 7-act structure.
Yeah, there hasn't been yet. That's a good idea, sir. I think I'm gonna take that idea. That's actually a good idea because there's definitely a lot. There's a lot that got cut.
Yeah, I mean, such a dynamic life. I'm sure like there's just so much that you couldn't get to.
Yeah, no, there's definitely a lot that got left on the cutting room floor.
When it came to the Hollywood section, what made you decide to get some of the guests like Oliver Stone? Was he a guest that you just, hey, I had to go get him, and why?
Well, okay, so some more backstory. It's Oliver Stone. So I have like 3 favorite directors. Spike Lee is one. Oliver Stone is also on that short list. Like I grew up watching JFK and Platoon and Born on the 4th of July and peak Oliver Stone. I was a big fan. My dad used to watch a lot of war movies also. So I'd kind of pop in and out, and then on my own as I got a little bit older, I would watch him. But Oliver Stone was somebody that obviously had worked with Jim, but through research I had found out was also a huge football fan. So I thought it made a lot of sense, knowing that we weren't going to have as much time during the Hollywood section. The idea was to find the right voices and voices that really jumped out in terms of taking us through the Hollywood career.
That was one thing that I didn't know about him, is how many movies he actually did. Yeah. And the movie, the 100 Rifles he did with Raquel Welch. I'm wondering, did the ask go out for Raquel?
She did. She was actually going to do it, and then schedule ended up kind of breaking down. And then when her schedule when she became free again, we were already in post-production, and it would have been tough to add her in. But that ask did definitely go out.
I was curious about that.
What was it like getting Belichick? He started to tell a great story, and he talked about the conversation, but he never went into the content of what the conversation was about. What was Belichick like?
So Belichick, I actually didn't do the Belichick interview. So there is a great filmmaker at NFL Films, Ken Rogers, that in many ways, he's the Belichick guy. Like he's interviewed Belichick, I think, more than maybe anybody ever. He does a lot of Belichick interviews, and he was doing an interview with Belichick for something else I can't remember, and we sent along our questions for him.
Got it.
So, but having Belichick in it was great. I think it was great because Belichick's also somebody that has this great affinity for Jim, and I know that they have a relationship going back to when Belichick was coaching in Cleveland, and they really struck up a friendship. And obviously, Coach Belichick being somebody that has a great love of the history of the game. I know many of us saw it when he hosted the NFL's all-time team a couple of years ago, and I think he has a comment in that series where he's like, if it wasn't the NFL 100, if it was the NFL 1, like Jim Brown would be the one. He'd be the one guy on the team. Which I thought was pretty cool. The people that lined up to do interviews for this, you don't always get that. Sometimes it's tough. We all know sometimes it's tough to get people to do interviews, whether it's players, coaches, celebrities, civil rights activists, social commentators like Dr. Boyd and Dr. Edwards. Pretty much everybody, if their schedule, permitted, they lined up to do the interview.
Looking back at the production of the film, and the success of the film, what would you say you learned the most from making that film?
It's interesting because there was a lot that I knew about Jim's life. There's a lot that I knew about NFL history. I'm a big fan of Hollywood history, but just some of the things that I did know about that I learned about, and during the research, talking to him, talking to other people, was really eye-opening. Seth, to your point, the Hollywood section of it was just mind-blowing to me. I knew I'd seen Jim Brown in some movies, but the fact that he was one of the guys for a good stretch there, and the fact that he left football at the peak of his powers to go to Hollywood, and the story behind that, it's crazy. And then just in terms of the football career and how dominant he was, I think it's tough to even now wrap your head around the fact that, he led the league in rushing every single year. He played except one, and the one year that he didn't, I think he was second and he was hurt that year. You know what I mean? It's just like crazy to think about just dominance on that level and comparing it to other athletes. And I'm like, obviously you had Babe Ruth, who was just like head and shoulders above everybody else when he played. And there's just few athletes that are just that dominant and that head and shoulders above and that much better than everybody else at their sport. I mean, Tiger Woods, when he was at the peak of his powers, there's just very, very few. And hearing people talk about that, I think was really cool. And people who were too young to see him talking about their parents talking about how great Jim Brown was, it's it's just like, man, it's like, because you go and you're like, was this guy this good? And everybody's like, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this. Like, really?
Some of those highlights, I was like, is he sped up? I'm like, some of those highlights, he was like going like a big, like a tractor trailer down the field.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I mean, and it's an apples to oranges comparison, but seeing somebody like Derrick Henry now, it's like, it just looks like bigger than everybody, stronger than everybody, faster than everybody. There's just very few athletes that are just better than everybody, and it's not fair. You just put them on a field and run like you're 5 years old and you line everybody up to run a race, and that person is 20 yards ahead of the next person. Like, okay, well, this kid's got something special.
I tell you one thing that jumped out to me that I didn't know is when you guys said he never missed a game. I'm like, like really?
Yeah.
Like that was mind-boggling. But I'll wrap up the second act here with a question about, you reincorporated the photos again at the end of the film, and you handed each person a photo, which I thought was a really nice touch. Did you pick those, or did you let them pick which photos they were going to hold?
No, so basically, me and the team, we had a series of photos that we picked out that we knew that would just be great photos. And ideally, it was a photo that had something to do with their relationship with that person. So we gave them a couple of options to pick from, and we had them there on the day, and they'd be like, I want that one, and I'd hand them the photo, and away we went. And in some cases, I would have them do shots with more than one photo, just to have a couple backups. But we usually went with the first choice.
It worked out well.
Now we're going to enter into our third act. This is going to kind of bring us to present time now, and we'll get into some quick hitters. But talk about a little bit what's going on now with you. I know you've been a big driver of the social justice initiative with the NFL. That's really happened and was spurred on, with the murder of George Floyd. Talk a little bit about some of that work that you're doing now with the NFL.
So for roughly 4 or 5 years now, in many ways since Kaepernick first took his stand, telling those stories and telling the stories of social justice has been something that's been very important to me. And in some ways, it predates Kaepernick. I did a piece on Alton Sterling, and I don't know if you guys remember the story of Alton Sterling, but I had Warwick Dunn, whose mother was a police officer, but who had been killed in the line of duty. Warwick connected with the son of Alton Sterling, but also the wife of a Baton Rouge police officer who had been killed in the line of duty, and they went to a Saints game together a few years ago. And I think that predated Kaepernick. It might have been right around the same time. But this type of work has been very important to me. So last year, when tragically Ahmaud Arbery was taken from us, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, I knew going into the season, especially with so many players speaking up about the events that were happening, I knew I wanted to find a way to allow the players to have a platform to share how they were feeling. So heading into the season, the NFL decided to honor and work with players to honor the victims of social injustice by wearing names of these victims on the back of their helmets. So Alvin Kamara actually reached out to the league, and Tracy Perlman, who's the SVP at the league, reached out to her and said that he thought that was a great gesture that the league was doing, but if there wasn't any storytelling behind it, then it was going to be an empty gesture, that it was just going to be, symbolic, and people would forget about it, after a couple of weeks. So Tracy reached out to myself and another colleague of mine, Rich Elmore, and we spoke to Alvin, took his feedback, and we created a series called Say Their Stories, which allowed players the opportunity to share why they chose the names that they chose, but also in many ways were pieces that celebrated the lives of these individuals. I had a great team that worked on this project with me, 2 story producers, Quincy Young, Chelsea Stark-Jones, who really knocked it out of the park with that series. And then in addition to that, Seth mentioned the Fritz Pollard documentary that I did last year. Did a piece a couple of years ago where Deshaun Jackson talked about his relationship with Nipsey Hussle, that honored the late, great Nipsey. But, using the platform, as a filmmaker to shine a light on some of the injustices that are going on in the country, but in many ways giving players the opportunities to share their stories. It's been something that that I really wanted to do and have been blessed with the opportunity to do.
Do you have any other dreams and aspirations that you'd like to pursue, be it in film, in sports, or in other areas?
Man, I love doing what I do, man. I love telling stories and having the opportunity to tell stories and to, it's funny, like we talk about, when you're starting a film or you're starting a project, one of the first things you do is like you look up that person on Wikipedia or you kind of Google them and you kind of see what pops up. And that's where you start. But as filmmakers, as we really dig, especially documentary filmmakers, if you're telling the Wikipedia version of the story, then you're not doing a good job as a filmmaker. It's like what's beneath the surface. And as long as there's stories to tell and as long as there's opportunities to get beneath that surface, I'm gonna keep doing what I do. And I love doing what I do, and I just want to keep doing it,
For the listeners out there, what's one piece of advice you'd give them if they do want to make a documentary film?
Well, I would say find a subject that you're passionate about. Find a subject or a person whose story that you really want to share. And I would also say that in addition to wanting to just share that story, if there's a theme or if there's just something that's a big picture that you want to explore, definitely keep that in mind as well. Because sometimes, to be completely honest, a theme will come to me before a player or a team or an event comes to me. So I'll give you a perfect example. Two examples. So when Nipsey was murdered, I was just like, I got to do something with Nipsey. I got to do something that honors this guy's life. I mean, this brother was out, trying to change the world and trying to make a difference. What's the Nipsey story? How do I tell a Nipsey story? A good friend of mine, an editor at the NFL, actually sent me an article. I don't even think he knew that I was trying to find a Nipsey story, but he just sent me an article. He was like, man, check this out. Deshaun Jackson was honoring Nipsey throughout the course of the season. I think it was 2 or 3 seasons ago now, by wearing different Nipsey cleats each week. Now, Deshaun is somebody that I've known since he was a Cal. So me and Deshaun have done I've known Deshaun almost as long as I've known Jim Brown. We've done a number of projects over the course of his career and my work. And all those conversations, I never knew that he knew Nipsey. So I reached out to Deshaun, and that was the quickest yes I think I've ever gotten. He was like, yeah, let's do it. Nice. And then, even with the events that happened this past year, like I did a project where Tyler Lockett wrote a poem on what it is to be a black man in America, last year. So that idea was basically, all right, I know I felt as a black man. How do I express this? And how do I express what so many different people are feeling, in my role as a primarily sports documentarian? I knew that Tyler Lockett wrote poems. I knew that Tyler Lockett is very thoughtful and very perceptive. So knowing that this was initially an idea that came to me, I went to Tyler and asked him, could you put pen to paper and put some words together? And he did. The results were amazing. Number of players stepped up: Jalen Ramsey, Adrian Peterson, Aaron Donald, to name a few, Saquon. They stepped up and recited his words. But to answer your question, sometimes it's finding a player or a team or an event that you're passionate in. Sometimes it's just knowing that you're passionate about something and figuring out a way to tie it to something else or tie it to somebody else. But passion is the key.
We're going to have to do a part 2 with Anthony on the Fritz Pollard and the Nipsey.
I'll tell you what, we watched several of your films, and Fritz Pollard just grabbed my attention. I had been sitting on it for a while, and I finally watched it, and it was well done, very well done. I had a ton of questions for that one, but I'll jump right to this one. When you talk to young black men like yourself that look like me and you, what advice do you give them? I know it may be different from the advice that you give someone making a film.
Man, it's work hard, man. It's and look, I tell this to a lot of young people that I speak to in panels, and Q&As and things of that nature. But I'm like, man, at the end of the day, and Seth can tell you this, it's working harder than the other person. You can be as talented as you want to be, but working hard and outworking people, that's something that's in your control. You may not have the talent of Jim Brown. You may not have the talent of Nipsey, but if you're willing to work hard, you've got a chance. You've got a shot. That's the great equalizer. It's hard work. So I tell people, you have to work hard. And, as black men, like we've always known that we got to work harder anyway. Black people, you grow up, your parents grow up telling you, or you grow up listening to your parents saying, you got to work harder and you got to be better to even have a shot, because there's things that you're going to have to go through that others may not. You're a little bit behind in terms of where the race started. So you got to catch up. So it's so hard work, dedication. And I would say, and this goes for everybody, being willing to learn and to never stop learning. Something my parents told me, and it's been so long, I can't remember if it was my mom or my dad, if it was both of them. But at a very early age, they said, learn something new each day, meet somebody new each week. And if you're doing that, you got a shot. So I try to learn something new every day and try to meet somebody. And it doesn't matter where they're coming from, what their background is, if they're in my field or if they're not. If you're meeting interesting people, it will help you as you continue to grow and continue to evolve in your life and your career and your worldview and everything. Just meeting people that are different than you, meeting people that have different perspectives of you, and just learning. It's like I tell my kids, man, it's like you guys have knowledge at your fingertips. There is nothing that you should not be able to. There's nothing you shouldn't know if you want to know it. You should be able to jump on Google, Yahoo, whatever, and get the answers to the questions that you have. We used to have encyclopedias. Like we had to go to the library and the card catalog and all that. It's like there's no excuse not to know and not to learn unless you don't want to, unless you're just lazy. So yeah, learn, and even as filmmakers, when we were coming up, like it was very specific in terms of the route that we had to take. It's like, I mean, Seth, man, there weren't 100 streamers and networks and companies that are putting out content. It's like content is a new word. There wasn't content. There were TV shows and movies, and that was it. Exactly. So there's just so many different ways to share stories and to tell stories. So I just say work hard and if you want it, it's at your fingertips. You just gotta go get it.
Yeah, and I will say, to speak to that work ethic, when I was working at the NFL Network and I met Anthony, I literally see Anthony go to an edit bay on like Wednesday, and then he wouldn't come out till like Friday. Like literally, like legendary edit sessions, like unreal, like work ethic. You're like, yo, this kid's a natural born hustler. Like it was no joke. Like so, you just knew you had that passion from the get go, and you're like, wow, and other people didn't have that. So you could just see there's just such a huge difference between the people who are going to rise to the top and then the people that are going to either probably get out of the business or, do real estate or something else. So that's the testimonial to Anthony's work ethic.
Nah, thanks, Seth. That means a lot, brother.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. Couple of quick hitters here. Favorite sports documentary?
Woo, man, that's a tough one. I mean, look, OJ Made in America that's almost not even a sports documentary. That's just one of the best. That's just one of the best things I've ever seen. But I'm a huge fan of that. Traditional sports documentary, man. I don't know. That's a good question. I like the two Escobars. I really like the two Escobars. I think there's one I'm missing. There's something out there that I can't think of right now that I'm gonna be mad that I forgot. but yeah. I just say OJ. Let's say OJ Made in America.
Person you interviewed or worked with that has made the biggest impression on you?
That's probably Jim Brown. I mean,
I was wondering if you're gonna go there, but you've worked with some heavy hitters now.
I mean, I've just done more interviews probably with Jim Brown, over the course of 10 years than anybody. But I mean, man, let me see. This wasn't an interview, but being around Jermaine Dupri for a couple of months. During leading up to the Super Bowl in Atlanta a couple of years was just cool to see his work ethic and to see just kind of how he gets down. I mean, interviews. I mean, look, man, I've been able to interview icons that changed the world, like Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton and people like this. I mean, it's amazing. But then I was a big Cowboys fan. Being able to interview Troy Aikman and Emmitt Smith and Deion Sanders and Michael Irvin, like. I was the biggest Michael Irvin fan there is, and Seth knows Michael Irvin's always around, in the NFL. So
he's like one of the boys.
Yeah, he's always there. So I mean, it's a blessing to be able to talk to so many different people. I mean, like even this past year working on the Black Quarterbacks doc, but then also I did a piece for Super Bowl called "Making of a Masterpiece," and being able and within a week span to interview somebody like Anthony Anderson, and then also Ozzy Osbourne, it's a blessing. But to be able to just kind of hear them talk after the interview is over, and just talk to them about, worldview and just they're giving you life lessons without giving you life lessons. They're just talking about things that they've been through in their life and achieving greatness. And I think that's been the key takeaway over all these years of doing so many interviews is, it's when the cameras are rolling, but it's also when the cameras aren't rolling, and people are just giving you knowledge, and they're just things that you can use in your life. And they may not even realize that they're doing it, but you're just getting knowledge from people that have achieved greatness, and it's free. They're free master classes. You know what I mean? Like, you got to pay for a master class, and you're just getting free master classes.
When it came to working with Chadwick Boseman and John Lewis, were you actually able to work with both of them, or were they just on a project and they voiced it, or they did things?
So the narration for the Chadwick for the HBCU documentary that Chadwick Boseman narrated was in the lead up to Black Panther. So this would have been like in December, January, and Black Panther dropped in February. I don't think anybody knew Black Panther was going to be as big as it. I mean, there's a lot of anticipation around it, and as there is anytime there's a Marvel movie, even before Black Panther hit, you're just like, man, this guy just has nothing else. He just has some pipes where it's like he conveys this gravitas, this like it's almost regal. Then of course Black Panther hits, and looking back all these years later, just kind of thinking about all the Chadwick Boseman roles that we're not going to be able to have, because he was tragically taken away from us. It's it's sad, but the fact also that he jumped at the chance of narrating a piece on HBCUs because that meant something to him, knowing his life was about to change, knowing this was right in the middle of the press tour for Black Panther, but carving out the time to do it. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know about Chadwick Boseman. And then with John Lewis, I actually didn't do the John Lewis interview. So that particular piece, I didn't direct it. I produced it, and the director of the piece actually did the interview. And then so the other time that I had John Lewis in a project was actually the Atlanta Super Bowl project that we were doing the lead up. And actually, my story producer did that interview because I was across town with Jermaine Dupri doing something else. So those are the two times that my paths went across with John Lewis, and I almost wish I would have switched now. But you think these people are gonna live forever too, man? Which is I guess that's the sad nature of life. People don't live forever. So
yeah, rest in peace, Chadwick Boseman and John Lewis.
Yeah.
Last question: who would you want to hear on this podcast?
Josiah Johnson. Has he already been on? Has Josiah been on this one? Has Josiah been on this one?
No, not yet.
Josiah would be great. Josiah would be great on this. But look, I think that
we're trying to focus on documentaries here.
I got you. I mean, look, I think that there's a lot of great filmmakers at NFL Films. I think that it would be great. Trent Cooper, Trent. Shout out to Trent Cooper. I think Trent would be great. Trent has a lot of knowledge to share.
He would be a good one.
Yeah, I think Trent would be great on this. There's a lot of great filmmakers out there. There's a lot. I think now more than ever, there's people doing what we love and what we do in this space. And spending time talking with you guys, as you see, like that 30 minutes flew by. I thought I had 30 minutes. Whatever I had, it's gonna have to wait.
Hey, you know how that goes. We always take a little more.
Hey, but we appreciate your time and your insight, man. You had some really good stories there.
Thanks, fellas. I appreciate you having me on.
A big thank you to Anthony Smith for giving us that masterclass on storytelling. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show. And if you do, we will give you a big shout out as one of our MVP listeners. We'll be back next week with another great episode of Beyond the Lens. And that's a wrap. And I'd like to give a special thanks to our editors, Jacob Gorenberg and Andrew Holman, and our production assistant, Candace Evans.